Let's check out the drum set that we're using on the vinyl recording. It's a Tama Star Classic Maple. Doesn't matter so much on this recording because we're pretty much triggering everything except for the snare. This is, I believe it's a 7-inch deep Yamaha wood snare. Got an SM57 on there. The toms have Heart Dynamics mesh heads and D-drum triggers. The kick drums are full of foam and pillows. Got some blankets on there also too to try to just muffle the sound, the natural sound of the kicks. And we've got some really nice mixture of cymbals here, some different ones, and Zildjians, Sabians, a couple of Paistis as well. The overheads that we're using are Neumann KM184s for the two main overheads, and then we also have a center overhead which is a KM184 as well. Let's go over here. The hi-hat mic is a Neumann KM84 vintage mic. You can see that we have it pointed about the middle of the hi-hat. We're pretty far away from the hi-hat. And let's go over here to the ride. There's another vintage KM84 on the ride. Right here we're looking at the DM5 that provides all of the sampled sounds that we monitor with. We're not going to use the DM5 samples on the actual recording, but this is what we monitor back with. I have a headphone amp there. On top we have a bunch of passive triggers, and the way this kit is wired up is that the triggers go out into these passive DI boxes which act as splitters. The XLR out goes into this 12-channel snake here, which goes down into the recording room, and from there it goes into a small Allen and Heath console where I amplify the trigger's output slightly, and then it goes into an Alesis trigger to MIDI I/O box, and that's what goes into our computer. That's how we get our MIDI from the toms into the computer. We amplify the triggered the trigger signal slightly because D-drum triggers, or especially the old D-drum triggers, don't have a whole lot of output. So we amplify it a little bit on this little console, and then it goes into the Alesis trigger I/O box and into the computer as MIDI. The other side of these direct boxes goes into the DM5 module, which gives us our sounds that we monitor with. We don't monitor with the Toontrack Superior Drummer because we don't want to mess around with any possible latency, and so the drummer listens to immediate sounds with the DM5. And I also record a stereo track of the toms from the DM5. I record a kick from the DM5 also, audio track. These heads, these Heart Dynamics mesh heads, are really amazing. They trigger beautifully, just incredibly accurately. They feel very close to regular toms. I'm sorry, regular heads, and they just perform flawlessly. I considered using a mesh head on the snare for this recording, but after doing some tests I found out that when you're going to record real cymbals, the difference between the snare tone what I'm trying to say is, if you use an electronic sound for the snare and you use real cymbals, you kind of can hear the difference between what the sampled snare room sound was like and the room sound that I'm getting here in this room. There's too much of a difference. So I decided that it was best to use a real snare, let the snare get into the overheads, also trigger the snare, and add a triggered sound to it later. But to have a nice natural snare sound mixed with a trigger sounds good. The toms is a different story. We're used to listening to toms be very separate. We always gate toms. We always give them their own kind of reverb. A lot of the times we augment tom sounds with samples. We're very used to, at least in the metal production world, listening to toms which sound very separate from the rest of the kit. So if we use a Toontrack Superior Drummer program to get our tom sound, which is very good anyway, gives us a lot of control, we get great tom sounds from that. But if there is any aspect of the tom sound that's a little bit fake, it's not such a big deal when it comes to toms, because we're used to that. When we're talking about snare, though, snare is the real voice of the drum kit, and we're kind of where people are naturally sort of attracted to the natural sound of a snare. We seem to notice when a snare sounds fake, and so I decided to use a real snare, and then just use the triggered toms. When the drummer it gets a little bit sloppy in his performance, as long as his snare and his cymbals are in time with the click track, he can mess up a little bit on the toms, and I can just push the MIDI notes around, and I can make the toms sound great. And so that's one of the main reasons why I decided to use these triggered toms, is because of the way that I record with Vile. With Vile, we have our drummer lives in San Diego and practices along to pre-production CDs at home, but we don't have a whole lot of band practice with him. And so there's a lot of improvising going on and sort of spur-of-the-moment performances. And in that kind of a situation where you don't have everything worked out perfectly, a drummer doesn't usually hit the drums very well when he's not really confident about what he's doing. And it's likely that he may mess up his timing a little bit. So the ability to use MIDI toms, MIDI sounds for toms, is really going to make it a lot easier to correct timing problems. So that's why I decided to use MIDI toms.